Yeah. Our first speaker for today's afternoon, is Melissa Rodriguez. Melissa Rodriguez has been with RI for over 14 years, holding a variety of roles in consulting and client service. Focus on driving thought leadership for the industry. She leverages her extensive CPG knowledge to advocate for a consumer-first approach to strategies and decision-making, and can be seen sharing insights across many industry associations. Melissa has deep expertise in CPG-related insights and measurement services, with experience supporting a myriad of cross-functional teams, marketing, category management, and sales, with a special focus on new products, innovation, and M&A. So let's welcome our speaker.
I was going to say good morning. It is not. It is also not June, if you notice my slide says June. So I was just notified by my now college senior that she moves in 2.5 weeks. So if anyone else is alarmed by the pace of the summer, I am with you. It is not June. Do not panic. Or panic if you're like me and you're not even prepared for this. So I'm going to stay right here. I'll kind of move, but if you can't hear me and I move too far away, please let me know. I tend to bump these little ones, so I don't use them because it's way more distracting. Melissa Rodriguez, I work for a company formerly known as IRI or NPD. If you're familiar with either of those terms, we have now come together and we are Circana. And we are in the CPG retail data space, as well as with our new merger, we cover almost every industry: books, toys, automotive, you name it, we have data on it. So I work primarily in the protein space, so I work very closely with our clients like Hormel, JBS, et cetera, et cetera. And that is why I am here today. So we're going to walk you through, I think it's, through the eyes of the consumer. That's exactly what my role is at Circana, is to understand what's happening in our consumer marketplace. Why do people buy what they buy? What drives their purchases? As consumers, obviously, we know how interesting the last couple of years have been. And so just really walking you through what that landscape looks like, and then a little bit of a dive down into the protein-specific space and what's happening and what's going on. I'll leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. The other housekeeping thing I will mention is it sounds like these decks and these recordings are all uploaded, so you do not have to furiously take notes. You will have access to all of this material. So with that, again, we'll talk about the current consumer market and then getting sort of in that state of sales update. So when we look at this, and I think we are all pretty familiar with this. This is one of my favorite images because we all sort of trotted along, we thought things were happening, and then we all know what's happened over the last few years. We don't need to get into it. We still talk about it all the time, right? But what that did was it created this sort of prism and this fragmented marketplace. And we're all living it. We're living it in our industries. We're living it as consumers, right? The cost of everything, inflation, and just bucketing out then from there, what's going to happen next? Highlight, we know a little bit, but it's still a huge question mark about what the next couple of years will bring. We've got good projections on what we're thinking will happen, but what we always knew to be true for the past decade has completely shifted over the past 4 to 5 years. And so just sort of coming to terms with how we put that together for what we're going to see in the future. When we talk to consumers and when we look at what consumers have to deal with, this doesn't surprise anybody, right? Like, you can see it. Prices are higher. We are met with roadblocks and decisions to make at almost every turn in our purchase behavior as a consumer. In your industries, you also have to deal with that, right? The high costs of everything. The wage growth, the lag pricing increasing, right? It's not keeping up with inflation. We all know that. Hot costs of housing, rent is ridiculous, mortgage rates. We're all very well aware of these things, so I will not go through all of them. But then you think about, okay, what continues to impact the consumers? Increase of debt, global conflict, weight loss drugs. God, this sounds really depressing. I'm a pretty cheerful person, though, so I'm going to make it positive, I swear. But it just continues to show that no matter where you are in a consumer journey, you do have to stop and think and make trade-offs for how you shop, what you buy, and what you're going to feed your family, provide for your family, et cetera, et cetera. So these are constant things that consumers are met with. And when we talk to them, we ask consumers all the time, hundreds of thousands of them, how do you feel about that? Okay, well, it's going to get a little sad for a minute. Well, they're still very concerned. They think that pricing will continue to remain high. They struggle with how they're going to balance what they make and the income that they bring in versus what goes out, right? Energy, housing, food, etc. What happens because of that is 84% of consumers are changing what they do. That is a big number, right? People are shopping differently and offering trade-offs. They may not take the vacation, or they may do a road trip. They may switch to a store brand versus a branded, which is just really happening everywhere. And they continue to really think about how they shop and where they spend their money. The other thing that's interesting up here is that people continue to buy online. And the younger consumers do. So it just shows you that certain habits that we developed over the past 4 to 5 years are continuing to play a role and will play a role for the next couple of years in how people shop. So as I mentioned, Circana covers a ton of industries. We're going to get into the retail side of things and food and beverage, but just in general, you can see how people are spending their money. When we talk about the trade-offs, people aren't buying more housewares, right? They're making their dishes last longer. They are not buying sports equipment. We're going to play it against sports to buy our kids cleats because no one's going to spend $300 on cleats. We're not buying new computers. We're not buying new cars. In fact, keeping up with car repairs, that was a really hard word for some reason, people are opting to repair their 10, 12, 13-year-old cars instead of going out and getting a new one. So all of those things matter. We're seeing some upticks though, right? Like food and beverage is obviously flat a little bit because people still have to eat, but that does impact how and where we shop. Prestige beauty is up, interestingly, because people still like to feel that they're treating themselves in certain ways. But when we look at what that means from a food and beverage perspective, people are eating at home. So this was a trend that started with COVID, obviously, right? We had to eat at home. We had no choice. This is continuing. It's driven by a lot of factors, so that you can see the total one on the left side. The top right one is retail, so that's what you buy at a grocery store. The bottom is the food service or away from home. So that could be anything you buy at a convenience store, a quick service restaurant like a McDonald's, fast casual at Applebee's, or even fine dining, right? It just puts it all together. But what we see is that it continues to stay on a home basis. Nearly 86, I think I have it on the next slide. Oh, I just kind of blew that, didn't I? But 86% of meals are sourced from home. Pre-COVID, that number was anywhere from 75 to 78%, fluctuated based on the season and maybe regionality, right? For those that are in the Midwest, maybe we don't eat out as much in January, but we sure do in the summer. What is driving this remaining high is the breakfast occasion and the dinner occasion. Lunch is a little bit lower, and we'll get into how and why that is, but mainly it's because more people are back at work, or more people are still kind of dabbling with eating out at lunchtime, or going out. Even if you work from home, you go out and grab lunch. But really, breakfast is that high one that continues to remain at home, and dinner. When we look at what that means, though, is that this impacts by generation. So continuing through generations, it's across the board. It's not that there's one particular generation driving this. The only exception, I would say, as a parent of an 18 and a 21-year-old, is they seem to have no issue door-dashing $25 worth of sushi, whereas a lot of us in this, that's astounding, right? But there are differences like that. Like they want it now, and they deserve the treat. Other people will do that by buying a Magnum ice cream bar and maybe spending $4.99 on your ice cream treat instead of $3.99. These are discussions that happen at my house pretty frequently when DoorDash rolls up with Taco Bell at 2 in the morning, which is very expensive, by the way. But they don't have a lot. They're living at home, right? So they don't understand the concept. We're preaching to the choir. But when we look again, when I went back to that dinner number, right, that total number of eatings at home is 86%. Dinner was 81%, so it's dropped a little bit. That's just people being a little bit more mobile at the dinner hour. A lot of that is driven by people with kids in sports, grabbing quick service. QSR is driving it, quick service restaurant, right? So it's your McDonald's, it's your Wendy's, Chick-fil-A, blah, you name it, right? But what we're noticing is that no matter how you consume your dinner, whether it's that way or a meal at home, you want it to be faster. 90% of consumers said they want a dinner that is on the table in 30 minutes or less. I would argue even faster, but that's what people are after. They want simplicity. They want it in one dish. That's why sheet pan meals are a thing. One pot entrees are a thing, right? If you've seen them on TikTok, Instagram, it's all about the ease of preparing food and then just getting it on the table faster. So that's what people are really looking for. When we think about then how people shop for their food, What is interesting, though, is that you would think, okay, remember in COVID when you would fill up your cart with as much as you could buy and you'd sweep the pasta aisle and shove it in your cart? Called panic buying. We did it for a couple years after that because we had to retrain our brains to not need 42 boxes of mac and cheese, unless you have small kids and that lasts you like a week. But what we notice is that because of these high prices and people doing these trade-offs and thinking more about how they shop and consume, that people are actually shopping more. So this is why. Because when you go somewhere and you did the giant cart full of groceries that used to be $150, $200, that is now $250, $300, $350, right? And I'm not talking Costco. Like, you can't get out of Costco with less than $400 on a Tuesday. So that's a different trip, and that is a special one, and we all just eat that, and we know that that's how life works. If you're at your regular grocery store, I live in the cities. If I go to Cub Foods, I cannot fathom dropping $300 on a cart, and I am not alone, because what is happening then is people would rather go every 3 to 4 days and stomach a $100, $200, $150 cart. It's the same price. When you spread it out over the course of your year shopping, you're spending the same dollars, right? You're not spending any less. It's just the sticker shock. So people are going and getting what they need to get them through 3 to 4 to 5 days, and then they're going back to the store. So what's happening is we used to do pantry stocking. We then kind of did a little bit of less of that, and then we're even further getting away, and we're calling them fill-in trips. So you still might go to Costco and get your meat in bulk or some of your produce and stuff like that, but you're filling in then every couple days with the things that you need to make your meals. And so we're noticing people are in the store more, which is actually a really good thing. And they're looking more. They're looking more at pricing. They're looking more at what's going on. And so when we're talking to retailers, we're saying, like, are you doing anything to make that trip exciting for them? We get a mixed bag of responses, but we just find that really interesting about they're spending more time in your stores. So just continuing to engage with them. That's what we're telling retailers to do. And it doesn't always have to be promotions, right? Everyone's sort of getting used to the fact that a price is a price. Doesn't mean we want to pay it, but here we are. Because this is happening, and the traditional grocery are actually the ones that are losing a little bit. So when we talk about exciting consumers, this is where it's not happening. So traditional grocery is actually struggling the most when we think about where share is going. And that's that dark purple at the bottom. Who is winning? Mass and Supercenter, that's the pink. Club is the orange. Club kind of does this a little bit back and forth, and it really just kind of depends on the time of year if we're seeing success there. I also heard that Costco is raising their membership prices by $5, which was like a huge uproar. The hot dog is staying the same, just so you know. It's still a $1.50 hot dog, but you're going to pay $5 more a year. But so we just find that really interesting, though, that like the grocery stores are suffering just a little bit more because people want to go and find the better deals. Walmart is doing a really nice job. Target continues to kind of try in the space of food, and they have hits and misses. So we're just really starting to notice that. When I shift gears, and I'm going to dive down into some sales. So again, you'll get all of this, so you don't have to get it to memory by any means. If we look over here, and this is just, we call it integrated fresh. It basically just means we've got random weight and fixed weight data. So any of the items that are, right, like deli items, random weight meat that isn't a fixed weight UPC'd item, we now capture that in our sales. And so we've brought all that data together to get a holistic view of the store. When we're looking at what that looks like from a dollar sales perspective, we know why 2020 was so high, right? It just was because we just bought so much stuff. Continue to go down. We start to see these price increases happening started in September of 2022 and carried obviously, well, until now. Some areas are softening, right? Like I think it was bacon had a double-digit price increase in 2023. That has come down significantly, and we're actually seeing the benefits in the perspective from like sales for bacon. Other areas too, chicken was huge in price increases. That has also come down. So just different areas that we're seeing pockets of growth again because of the softening prices. So when we look over time, you can kind of see quarter by quarter from a dollar sales perspective. It looks relatively, it's just kind of chugging along, right? The bars are just sort of happening and they're there. The pink bar that goes along is showing us what that means year over year. And so you can see we've sort of hit this trough again of we're still up in dollar sales, makes sense. Some categories still are higher priced than they were a year ago and 2 years ago. So they're just sort of still seeing some price increases, but nowhere near what we saw in 2023. We could argue, right, like as you think about it as a consumer, it doesn't feel that way a lot, but there are pockets. And so that's when people are in the store more, highlighting some of those deals is where we're seeing retailers have success. So there's a lot going on this chart, but just to show you in general, the purple is the dollar sales, the pink is the volume, and just showing overall what's growing and what's going on. Beverages are up. Beverages continue to just astound and wow. About 8 years ago, it was all about ready-to-drink coffee and tea drinks, like the Starbucks Frappuccinos. Now it's all about energy drinks, Celsius, Prime, right? Driving all of that. So again, if you have kids, you go through like 30 of those a day. It's really cheap. No, it's not, but here we are. So that's another area that we're seeing some nice growth. General food is kind of growing. Meat is the interesting one, though. It's got up in dollar sales, and that's on the top right here. And we're actually just seeing total meat agnostic, is actually growing for the first time in value sales. It's actually only up 1.5%. So when I say growing, that's what I said I was going to be positive. It has finally turned a corner, because if we looked at this a year ago, it was down anywhere from 6 to 12%, depending on the category. So the fact that we've seen some rebounding, at least at retail from a meat perspective, is huge. Areas that also continue to grow, deli, middle row, far right. That's what I talked about, and that includes deli prepared items. So it's not just traditional deli of meat and cheese. It's any entree that you can get, the rotisserie chickens. Those continue to just fly. Any pizzas that are made there, any other sandwiches, salads, that kind of stuff. So again, going back to that convenience mindset and all the ingredients that go with that. And then seafood is not doing so hot. We could spend days talking about the seafood industry, but we won't do that here. And then when we get specifically looking at like what's driving this, so same chart, different metrics. This is getting into, okay, what are we seeing within these pockets? So the orange, these are kind of dull colors when I look up here, but they looked cute earlier. Average weekly items per store selling, that just means how quickly are things rolling off the shelf, right? So how quickly is someone grabbing it and going, turns, that is another way that people would say that. And then we've got it for items, and then the yellow is the dollars. So again, beverages continue to grow. Produce is actually the drag, and that is just continuing to be because produce remains very high priced. So that's just what we're noticing there. Double clicking even further, I won't get into this because I think as consumers and in any industry, the more we talk about price, the more we're ready to not talk about price. So again, I noted there are some areas that are coming down in pricing, but plenty of areas that are continuing to still see price increases of 2 to 5%, which again, is nothing compared to the price increases that we saw last year, right? I don't think when I was talking with our clients that I saw any prices, especially in the meat space, that were less than a double-digit price increase from 22 to 23. Bacon being, I think, one of the highest ones. I think one time it was like a 24% price increase year over year. So, and then we just look at like, what does that mean? So what you would think was, okay, well, we'll put it on deal, right? We'll start to market it and get things turning faster. It didn't work as well as it used to because A, the deals just weren't hot, right? 10% off of a 30% markup isn't a deal in some eyes. And so it would still remain too high for people to buy at the volume that they were buying it before. We are seeing that turn around though, so there are promising things happening in the merchandising space, and we're growing in efficiency again, which basically means like the money that we're putting out as like a retailer to offer the deals or the manufacturer to offer the deals, it is starting to come back. It wasn't before. People just were unbothered by the 10% discount off of something that was, you know, marked up so significantly. But again, we're seeing pockets change there. Again, we already talked about this and looking at like that share of meals prepared at home. It continues to kind of be at that higher level. When we look at, again, this driver, there's a lot of squiggly lines on this chart, but my daughter's always like, it looks like a heart monitor. And I'm like, yep, that's basically what it is. But you can notice there are some things happening here. And this is where we're talking about the trips and what's going on. That trips per buyer is that pink line. That's what we're talking about when we say people go into the store more. And it's just because then it's a more palatable price tag cart ring, and that's why we're seeing them in there more. They're not necessarily spending any more or any less per basket, but that's because of that new behavior of we're shopping more so that we're hitting a price point that we like to see, and not the sticker shock. again, when we look at like what's happening, if we look at the meat, meat is actually flat from a share perspective. When we just look at total like departments in the store, meat is flat versus last year, down ever so slightly from 2 years ago. Again, that's just, thank you. Again, that's just what we're noticing in the rebound of some of the pricing, right? So we did see people back away from meat purchases just due to the price increases. While I said produce had taken a hit lately, they still actually have grown significantly year over year, but continue to just struggle in the near term. When we look at what's driving and what's happening in some of these spaces, this is what I find super interesting, is that there's a lot going on. So these are top growers. This is what's happening. So beef is up nicely, chicken is up nicely. Bacon here for the first time, it's only down ever so slightly. If I look at super recent numbers, and I think I just did, this is through June 30th, I just looked at the latest data that I have, and bacon's actually up a couple percentage points. So it's lapped its performance from before that was suffering. Pork on the bottom right, down 1%. We would consider that relatively flat, and that's pretty good news coming into the rest of this year. And then some produce areas. Even though produce is not doing well, grapes are killing it. They're called cotton candy grapes. If you have never had those, that's what's driving that. So I think it's literally one type of grape driving that. But you can see there's a lot of ingredients. And then I talked about the deli entrees, right? And people really wanting that convenience aspect to have easier meals prepared for them. I know I'm probably going really fast, but just want to make sure I cover things. So, did you know? 40% of adults seek more protein in their diets. I think protein. It's on every package you have ever seen. I think it's even on Cheerios now. And it literally says like 1 gram of protein. So I think that's really interesting. 25 billion pounds of meat were purchased in the last year, which netted to about $70.3 billion in the fresh meat department. 18.5 billion of that was on chicken alone. And the average consumer consumes 59 pounds per person, and 76% of that is at dinner time. So when you think dinner, center of plate, protein, meat is really the driver. That is unchanged, right? We just think that those are fascinating facts to learn about people. When we think about like what's going on with that, what's happening is that they're spending a little bit less than they were before. Some of that just has to do strictly with how the high prices came. They were buying smaller sizes or maybe not buying it as often, right? Kind of doing some things related to that. Product trips per buyer, again, we've talked about that remaining high. It looks the same from a meat perspective. Dollars per trip, that yellow one, or sorry, in-basket dollars per trip, the yellow bars, again, continues to be a little higher. So when we looked at it in 2021, right, if meat was in the basket, the average basket ring was $86. It's $9 higher, but if you multiply that by how many consumers, that's when you can see it starts to drive that. And if you multiply that by 52 weeks a year, that is how much more a consumer is spending than they were before, right? So just a lot more. When we look at it from like who's winning, and we talked about the retailers before and what's happening, meat has gained a dollar share in internet. A lot of that is direct to consumer, butcher box type things that are happening, specialty stores, and then club. So club is continuing to see great success. And there is obviously the value mind proposition that people are thinking. It's a little less than it used to be from a value perspective in club, but the inherent thought is still there. So when a consumer does a meat stock up at Costco, again, they're willing to do the $400 to $500 basket ring because that's obviously something that feeds them for more than, a week. When we look at what's going on from a species or type, again, it's got that 69 billion is the latest number that we have, 16 billion in volume. Again, seeing growth across both of those, which is very nice to see. What is the growth coming for? Beef drives dollar growth, chicken drives volume. Pork is actually down slightly in dollars and slightly in volume in totality, right? Not getting into the type. And you can kind of see some other pockets that are seeing growth. Turkey has rebounded as well, but chicken and beef still kind of are huge drivers of the meat case. I don't know why that looks like that, but it's 98.3. 98% of consumers, apparently it was just shocking, the percentage just had to jump away. But 98% of consumers have purchased meat in the last year. So it's obviously on almost every plate in the US. So, and when we think about that, we're just continuing to track what they're doing. When we look at from a type perspective, though, this is where you can see a little bit more detail about where we're seeing the growth and what's happening. So again, beef is driving significant dollar growth, and that's due to that strong demand and high pricing. They did back off some price increases, and so they are starting to see the benefits of that. Same with chicken, again, seeing some growth there, and some other areas that you can see too. So different cuts of beef are actually driving the meat case as well. Some areas that probably aren't looking as good, unfortunately. So bacon, again, this shows down ever so slightly. This has turned around in the last month, which I find very interesting. Pork loin, has seen some hits. Hot dogs and some other areas are also down slightly. When we think about what that means from a price perspective, so you think like, well, okay, what's driving that? A lot of that does have to do from a pricing perspective. And so the price, the ones that are declining, right? So the pink or whatever peach colored ground beef, chicken, those are the ones that have actually seen price declines versus a year ago. And that obviously is driving some of their success in recent months. So when we think about what's going on from a meat case, standpoint, this is where we're talking about those did you know. Here's a double click into some of those facts. So there's a lot to be gained by being a meat destination. What we are learning about consumers is that 10% of fresh meat shoppers drive over 34% of sales. So when you think of your heavy buyers of meat, they're a third of sales, right? So we find that very interesting. That's pretty high, that 10%. Usually it's somewhere around a third and a third, like a third of your buyers or a third of your sales. This shows exponentially that heavy buyers are where it's at. Your loyal meat customers are the ones driving category success. So focusing on them. That other, the next 10% drives another 20%. So over 50% of sales, or close to 50, right, are coming from 20% of consumers, which we just find fascinating. These people, these heavy buyers that we like to talk about, they spend nearly 4 times as much in a meat case than the average consumer. They spend, you can even see the number, right? We're talking almost, $6, $7 more, and they shop nearly 3 times as often. So just continuing to, when we're thinking about these folks, these are the ones that are driving the success. When we saw volume declines, people just assuming like, oh, people aren't even buying it. Well, we know that 98% of consumers have meat on their table, and we know that at dinner time, 76% of the center of plate is protein. They're not leaving. What they're doing is changing how they purchase. And so what we think is interesting is that 76% of consumers changed one purchase of how they purchase meat and poultry. So they changed how much. So again, smaller sizes might be what's happening, again, driven by pricing. They might be changing to cheaper cuts. We did notice a lot of that happening. And they might even be changing brands. Obviously, that's a little different across different categories. But then I think it's that wear piece as well. So obviously, I mentioned, right, club is seeing some solid growth while grocery is not. People have changed how they shop from a meat perspective. When we think about like stretching the meat dollar and reducing waste, again, these people continue to make changes. They buy what they need. That speaks again to the amount of trips that are happening and how many times people are going to the store. They cook meals that stretch. Leftovers that used to sit, there's like a meme I saw that it was like, we keep leftovers like a real family to throw them away before garbage day. Leftovers are actually being eaten now more than they ever have been before. And that, again, is just because we're stretching the meals, we're stretching the dollars that people are putting into that. And people might even be serving smaller portions, nearly 30%, right? 27% are actually just having less meat on the table. And then 23% are cooking meatless meals, right? I think we've all heard of the Meatless Monday trend, so people are playing around with some other options, apparently only on Mondays, but there you go. What do we think is going to happen and what will continue to happen? It's just going to be, again, we're lapping some price increases. Inflation is lowered in the meat case. We're going to see more promotions, and they'll continue to drive some efficiency. But all in all, it's going to just sort of be, we're using the word subdued, right? It's just going to be kind of tracking along to what we've seen over the last 1 to 2 years. We're not going to see growth like gangbusters. We're also not going to see it move the other way. And so we think that that's an okay story right now, considering certain areas of the store are seeing some pretty hard hits. So if you think of canned goods and pantry staples, season aside, we think some of it had to do with the warmer winter that occurred pretty much everywhere. but those are the areas that are just getting hammered with double-digit declines right now. So sitting at a 1 to 2 decline is actually an okay place to be right now. And that's my positive spin. But yeah, so that was a lot of data and numbers just being flung at you. Again, you'll get access to this, so you'll have it. I'm available anytime to dive in deeper, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take any. Yeah?
Yeah, when you described what you did, I thought you were going to be, say you were the conduit between the consumer and the supplier. And are you really that? Are you determining what the consumer wants, then going back to the supplier and say, hey, you ought to be doing this?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. With that in mind, you're talking about the cost of protein. If you look at chicken and beef, what's the highest priced cut? It's the loin.
Mm-hmm.
It's the breast. And you look at pork, and it's one of the lowest prices. And I'm always amazed at the fact that you can go to one of the club stores, as you call it, and you can buy a whole pork loin for $1.98 every day of the year. And in the meat case, you'll have the boneless chop in there for $3.69. All they did was cut it and throw it in a plastic, and people don't get it.
Yep.
Well, when you talk to people, they say, I don't know what to do with a whole loin.
Completely.
So why don't we cut the loin in smaller packages and market it in smaller packages?
Yep. Yep.
I mean, where is the packer and the retailer not? And maybe people wouldn't buy that. I don't know.
Yeah, so well, you're absolutely right. It has to do with that sort of, we see the same thing in seafood, right? Like people are like, I don't know how to cook that. So they like don't even touch certain items, in the store. They'll go out and get it. We are starting to see that. There are certain retailers that are doing the diligence, behind their counters to offer that. We think it's really just the education piece. And so when I said behind the counter and it's happening, think of now how the labor in a grocery store has shifted, right? You're lucky if you can find one person behind that counter. There used to be 5 or 6 who used to know them by name. They used to be knowledgeable. They used to offer what was on special or maybe what they had a surplus of. There's only one guy back there now, and so he can't, she cannot manage through that process. So there's the lack of education that we think is happening. And so we saw it with turkey, like ground turkey. People were like, well, I know what to do with ground beef. It's like, we do the same thing. Like, there's a flavor barrier. It's a little different, but people would be like, what do you mean I can make tacos with ground turkey? And it was just like, what do you mean? What do I mean? So there is an educational play. And so, when you think about agencies getting those messages across and working with the retailers to educate operators to be able to do that, we've seen it have success. And where we've seen it have success is in the seafood area. Even though there are still some that are untouchable, offering, pre-seasoned salmon fillets and vacuum pack is growing like double digits before, because people are like, oh, I just have to put it in a pan or on a sheet. And so it's like, how do we get that education hump is what is the $1 million question, right? And it's having the labor there to help educate a consumer.
I don't want to monopolize your Q&A
No.
here, but another example that I always think about is when I hear people say, well, I can't afford protein, I'll feed my kids cereal. Well, if you got a teenage boy, you give him a bowl of cereal at 7 o'clock in the morning or at 6 o'clock at night, he's eating 2 more of them before he goes to bed or before he leaves the
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
It's not it doesn't satisfy their appetite.
Correct.
And cereal, they think it's cheap. It's for what you're getting. It's not. It's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most expensive way to buy sugar.
Yep. Does taste good though. No, I think you have a really good point. And so that's the thing where it's like, so that goes back to the convenience factor too though, right? So it's like, that's why we see protein center of plate at dinner, because our mindset knows that that's what that looks like. Our mindset knew that for breakfast 50, 60 odd years ago. That was a staple, right? Eggs, bacon, and toast were staple. And then came in cereal and, I was going to say Keebler Elves, and then I'm like, no, it's Snap, Crackle, Pop. It's different, but whatever, the Rice Krispies. And so that shifted. So what we're now seeing some of our manufacturing partners do is figure out like, okay, then how can I monopolize on the convenience breakfast trend, whether that's in a frozen space or some quick, easy way to get to a breakfast that does include protein. And it isn't the traditional way, unless it's a Saturday or a Sunday, right, where you do the full spread. But it's how do you provide that handheld convenience with the protein inclusion, right? So all of the breakfast sandwiches, all of the new, I mean, you go down the breakfast aisle and the innovation there is pretty insane. And then even in the refrigerated aisle, right, when you're next to bacon and you look on that top shelf, it's like pancake dippers with sausage bites and different things like that are coming to market. The problem is that we're noticing with that is that the manufacturing partners are too quick to dismiss that as not successful because they're not seeing the same volume sales that you would see just selling straight bacon or something or selling straight breakfast sausage. So that's the mindset too of we're trying to help them understand like innovation and innovation hurdles look very different than they used to, right? You're not going to launch something that's going to make $100 million in its first year. 30 to 40 million is acceptable. So that's what we're trying to train people. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about the niche markets? And we just had a presentation on Prop 12, open pen gestation, environmentally friendly, animal welfare.
Yep.
Niche markets growing, shrinking. What percent? What do you see?
Oh, for the Prop 12 markets?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Outside of that.
Yeah, so we actually just did some really nice thought leadership on that. When I say we, I mean my company had nothing to do with it. But yes, so pork sales in California have actually declined, right? And so now that it's being, and part of that, so I worked very closely with Hormel during the Prop 12. And so just getting everything set up took a lot longer, getting retailer compliance. Like Target literally was like, hard no, we're not doing it. So it is actually, we're seeing some declines there. What's the other one? Is it Maine or Massachusetts, right? Yeah. They're actually growing. And so I don't know what that says about the marketplace, but I don't know if it's just higher prices in general. So yeah, we're still seeing a lot of decline in that space. And we think it still has to do with retailer compliance. And just, the other thing that we noticed too is that fewer items per shelf. So we used to see, 12 odd items from a pork perspective on shelf. Now it's down to 8. And so it's just, if manufacturers weren't willing to play the part, they're obviously not going to be on shelf. And then from a retailer perspective, if they think they're not going to sell through it due to the higher cost associated, they've just cut their shelf sets down. So. Mm-hmm.
About the percentages and the changes in buying habits and meat consumption overall. So you mentioned in the first few slides that people still want to treat themselves. Do you think that that's why we don't see as much of a shift from kinds of protein? So people will choose a cheaper cut, like go to ground beef instead of a steak, right? Mm-hmm. But we don't see that migration going from steak to a pork chop.
Yeah.
Do you think that beef is still seen as like a luxury meat?
Yes.
And so they're
Yep.
treating themselves?
Yep.
Or?
Cuts of beef remain higher in the consumer mindset of a special occasion meal.
And chicken is still up. So is that a lack of education on the pork side as far as nutritional value?
Yep.
Because chicken is seen as healthy.
Yeah. I think so. I think that would play a pretty large role. I think, again, it gets back to that sort of education piece of what would I do with that, right? Like, people know how to cook a steak. And so I think that there probably is some adversity to, but they also know how to cook chicken. So if you know how to cook chicken, you can cook pork, right? Like, So I think there is probably something that we could do there to have folks understand that, the ease of preparing and what that could look like. But then also, what's the avenue to potentially get special occasions, right? People are going for beef tenderloin and high cut steaks. And so how can you supplement that with a nice pork tenderloin? Tastes just as good. So
looking at value-added products,
yeah.
Any antibiotics ever, is that trend increasing, decreasing?
It's increasing for chicken. So yeah, the NAE stuff is still increasing for chicken. It obviously dipped a little bit as chicken prices rose because people were like, I'm gonna buy what I can find, as close to $10 a pound. Now that we've backed off on the pricing there, that's where the only place that we're seeing it grow significantly yet is still in the chicken space. So not yet. Yeah. One more.
I saw on your list, on one of your slides, you had like the top 10 pork-based. What's your message to the pork industry to get more pork cuts on that
Yep.
list?
Yep. I think it's kind of some of the points that we were just making. It's about how do you create the noise around it? How do you help folks understand the health benefits, but also, balancing it with understanding what's a health benefit and getting and commercializing that message. Also then, if you see some of those higher beef cuts, like what can you do to get a special occasion mindset around it? So
How does flavor fit into all of that, though?
oh, it should, because look at ground turkey. If ground turkey can do it, anybody's got to be able to do it. Sorry, I didn't offend anybody by that, but you know what I mean though? It's if people are going to buy ground turkey and that tastes like nothing, but helping people understand that throw out a taco season, have you thought about tacos or have you thought about soy sauce, right? That drives some of that as well. And so, yeah, pork has a natural inherent great flavor. And so I think people assume that salty goodness flavor equals lack of a health halo, and that's incorrect. So I think that's a piece that could be helpful to understand.
One very quick follow-up. Do plant-based meats fall into your meat category, or are they thought of,
We pulled them out for this, and they're actually in double-digit decline. And that's driven by a lot of things. It's driven by the ingredient decks that are on them. People have become educated on that 26 ingredients is not good for you, as well as the price. I think it was Beyond Meat. Their 4-burger patty was going for $17.99, and so even when beef patties were $14.99, these were seeing 30 to 40% price markups. So they've taken a pretty heavy hit. And then even just during COVID, when we were they actually did well during COVID because people were like, there's nothing left, I'll give it a go. But we've seen that success being lapped, and they're not performing as well anymore. So, cool. Thanks, everybody.
So let's